Alright guys, this video is on human anatomy and physiology. So this one really probably covers the most of any of our science videos for this test, but it's also probably the most general. So anyway, we're going to get into a bunch of cellular function concepts, as well as getting involved in some types of tissue and systems like the immune system, and then finally get into planes, like planes of your body, like the sagittal plane, if you've ever heard of that. Okay, so that's quite a bit to do, so let's get right into it. Okay, so for each of our science videos, we're going to have a bunch of questions at the beginning, and then we'll have these same questions again at the end for you to try to answer, and we'll cover everything that's within these questions in the video. So it is important to pay attention to these, right? And that um, we're kind of learning nerds here, but like basically to have a basic understanding of the difference between passive and active learning. So passive learning is where you just like listen to a video or watch a video, or you just underline stuff in text and then reread it. Okay, so that's considered passive learning and tends not to work very well. Active learning usually involves answering questions, being able to explain the concept to somebody else. That's stuff that sticks in your mind. Okay, so you'll probably hear me say that in a lot of these videos, but it's important to keep reminding you we want active learning. That's what will really help you, not just for this test, but for anything you want to learn. Okay, so let's see. First question, defining feature for eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells. Okay, we'll go over that right away. What is the sagittal plane? Right, there's going to be three planes that we're going to go over, which is the coronal plane, the sagittal plane, and the transverse plane. You need to know what each of those are, right? Almost all of these, like, can you answer it in one sentence? So I don't need a lot of details about the sagittal plane, but in one sentence, can you tell me what it is? Um, what regulates which molecules are allowed to enter and exit the cell? That's a two-word answer. Um, which system controls sleep cycles? Ribosomes, what do they do? Smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum, just ER. What do they do? And what are known as the power generators of the cell? Why is it called that? Okay, so those are some questions to keep in mind. And as we hit a point where we go over one of the questions, is we'll kind of circle back here to make sure we're really trying to lock in those points. All right, let's get going. So eukaryotes versus prokaryotes. Okay, so eukaryotes have internal membranes while prokaryotes do not. A prokaryote is a unicellular organism that lacks a membrane-bound nucleus, mitochondria, or any any other membrane-bound organelle. Okay, so that was really the important point right there, is that it lacks a membrane-bound nucleus. The prokaryote does. Prokaryotes are divided into two domains, Archaea and Bacteria, and the first living organisms were prokaryotes. So that's another important one. A eukaryote is any organism whose cells have a cell nucleus. Okay, so there we can see the difference, right? Right, what is the defining feature that sets eukaryotic cells apart from prokaryotic cells? Our very first question, right? Eukaryotes have a cell nucleus. Prokaryotes do not. Okay, that's really the big one we want to take away. Eukaryotes can be unicellular or multicellular. Again, the defining feature that sets eukaryotic cells apart from prokaryotic cells is that they have membrane-bound organelles, especially the nucleus. Right, just trying to drive that point home. Eukaryotes evolved about 1 billion years ago, while prokaryotes evolved about 3.6 billion years ago. So again, trying to, the nucleus is the main point you want to take away from the slide. The second point, if you can remember it, you're not going to be asked about the 3.6 billion versus 1 billion, but just understanding that prokaryotes evolved first. Okay, and then we get in to the components of a cell. So we're just going to go through a bunch of these. There's probably about 10 of them here that we're going to have to know. Most of what we have here. So we'll start with the nucleus. The nucleus contains most of the cell's genetic material, which is organized as DNA molecules combined with a large variety of proteins to form chromosomes. Okay, so that's really the part that we want, genetic material, right? Trying to think of this pretty simply. Like most of this stuff we want to be able to just answer in one sentence, right? Nucleus contains most of the cell's genetic material. The genes within these chromosomes are the cell's nuclear genome and are structured in such a way to promote cell function. The nucleus maintains the integrity of genes and controls the activities of the cell by regulating gene expression. So that's another important one, right, is that it regulates gene expression as well. But the genetic material, if we can only remember one thing about the nucleus, that's what we want. Okay, as we move on, the next one would be the plasma membrane. You can kind of see it written up at maybe about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, something like that, on the screen, right next to the rough ER. Okay, so the plasma membrane, so I'll get a little detail here on how it works. It controls what enters and leaves the cell. Let's go back to the questions. Right? If we look at the third one down here, what regulates which molecules are allowed to enter and exit the cell? Plasma membrane, right? Okay, so then we just look at a little bit of detail of how does it do this. The way the plasma membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell is that its volume, which is 4/3 pi r to the third, r being radius, increases at a faster rate than surface area, which is pi r squared. 4 pi r squared, sorry. So again, all we're really saying there, volume increases at a faster rate than surface area. Okay, knowing the actual formula, that's not going to show up here. So cell volume increases to the cube of the linear increase, while the cell surface area increases only to the square of the linear increase, right? The volume was to the third, the surface area was just squared. All cells are surrounded by a plasma membrane. The membrane is composed of a phospholipid bilayer with proteins dispersed throughout the layer. The membrane is also covered in places with cholesterol molecules and proteins. Okay, the plasma membrane is selectively permeable and regulates which molecules are allowed to enter and exit the cell. Okay, that last sentence, that's the one we want. Selectively permeable regulates what is allowed to enter and exit the cell. If you can remember stuff about volume and surface area, that's great, but those are really the two big points. Okay, next let's look at the nucleolus. Right, very quickly here. The nucleolus is a substructure of the nucleus. It transcribes ribosomal RNA and combines ribosomal proteins to create the large and small ribosomal units. Okay, so nucleolus, all we just said there was it's involved in ribosome assembly. If you know that about the nucleolus, that's what we need to know. Right? This diagram is just here to help us kind of picture how all this stuff fits together, right? But really the function of all these parts of the cell are really what we want to know, right? And so for the nucleolus, ribosome assembly. If you got that in your mind, you're good. Okay, next let's look at ribosomes. Ribosomes are a big deal. Ribosomes are both synthesized and produced in the nucleolus. The ribosome is the site of protein synthesis. Ribosomes link amino acids together in the order specified by messenger RNA molecules. Ribosomes consist of two major components, which is one, the small ribosomal subunit, which reads the RNA, and the large subunit, which joins amino acids to form a polypeptide chain. Each subunit is composed of one or more ribosomal RNA molecules and a variety of ribosomal proteins. Okay, so that was a lot to take in, right? But really all we're thinking is ribosomes are involved in protein synthesis. Okay, if you have that one part in your head, we're pretty good. Okay, so let's jump ahead to smooth and rough ER. You can see the smooth ER kind of down towards the bottom of the screen. Smooth ER is devoted almost exclusively to the manufacture of lipids, and in some cases to the metabolism of them and some associated products. So if we looked at an example such as liver cells, Smooth ER enables glycogen that is stored as granules on the external surface of smooth ER to be broken down to glucose. Okay. Smooth ER is also involved in the production of steroid hormones in the adrenal cortex and endocrine glands. So large amounts of smooth ER are found in liver cells, and one of the main functions is to detoxify products of natural metabolism. Um, and so what that really will show up in is overloads of either alcohol consumption or drug consumption. What will happen is smooth ER can double the surface area within a few days to help provide some function when we've just had way too much to drink. So that's an interesting function there for a smooth ER. And once it's returned to, once the assault, if you want to call it that, has subsided, then the smooth ER will return to its normal size. All right, rough ER, which is up at the top by the ribosomes. So rough ER gets its name because it is studded on its outer surface with ribosomes. These are called membrane-bound ribosomes and are firmly attached to the outer cytosolic side of the ER. Rough ER is found throughout the cell, but the density is higher near the nucleus and the Golgi apparatus. Okay, so there was smooth and rough ER, so we want to know the differences between them. That was one of our questions as well. Okay, so moving along. So your main takeaway there, though, was rough ER, protein translation. Smooth ER, detoxification, and lipid synthesis. Those are the differences. Okay, Golgi apparatus. So I don't believe we have the Golgi apparatus on here. But anyway, you'll find the Golgi apparatus located near the nucleus with several flattened membranous sacs. The Golgi apparatus receives proteins and lipids, or fats, from the rough ER. It modifies some of them and sorts concentrates and packs them into sealed droplets, which are called vesicles. Okay, so for Golgi apparatus, we're just thinking protein sorting and modification. That's our takeaway for that one. Okay, next we have mitochondria and ATP. Okay, these are important, and this is one of our questions as well, I believe. Let's look to make sure. Yeah, what are the power generators of the cell? Why is it called that? So let's get into that right now with mitochondria. Mitochondria are rod-shaped organelles that be considered the power generators of the cell. Okay, so there's our answer to the question. Converting oxygen and nutrients into ATP. ATP is the chemical energy of the cell that powers the cell's metabolic activities. This process is called aerobic respiration, and this is the main reason animals breathe oxygen. Also, to differentiate plants and animals, chloroplasts produce ATP for photosynthesis in plants, while mitochondria produce ATP for aerobic cellular respiration in animals. Okay, we're almost there through the cell. Like I said, there's a lot of them. So we got two more, and then we'll get into the tissues. All right, so lysosomes. Lysosomes break down cellular waste products, fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and other macromolecules into simple compounds, which are then transferred back into the cytoplasm as new cell-building materials. To accomplish this, the lysosomes utilize about 40 different types of enzymes, all of which are manufactured in the ER and modified in the Golgi apparatus. So they're using a couple of the concepts we just went over, right? But then lysosomes, we're thinking waste breakdown. All right, then we move into the cilia and flagella. Cilia and flagella move liquid past the surface of the cell. Again, that's the big point. Move liquid past the surface of the cell. For single cells, such as sperm, this enables them to swim. They consist of a cylindrical arrangement of 9 microtubules, and you can see those microtubules over there kind of on the left side of the screen, about middle of the way down. A pair of single microtubules run up through the center of the bundle, producing the 9+2 arrangement. And be nice to know and remember that the cilia are short while the flagella are long. Okay, so there's all the stuff on the cell. Okay, so if we were to just go back and review real quick, I know that was a lot of stuff. If you're familiar with it, it's probably pretty simple. If you used to know it or don't know it, then there's a lot of new stuff, right? Your main points: eukaryotes have a nucleus, prokaryotes do not. The nucleus contains the cell's genetic material. Plasma membrane controls what enters and leaves the cell. The nucleolus is involved in ribosome assembly. Ribosomes involved in protein synthesis. Smooth ER involved in detoxification and lipid synthesis. Rough ER, protein translation. The Golgi involved in protein sorting and modification. The power generator of the cell is mitochondria. Lysosomes involved in waste breakdown. And cilia and flagella move liquid past the surface of the cell. Okay, let's finally move on to some basic stuff on tissues. All right, so as we start with epithelium, it serves two basic functions. It can provide a covering, such as skin, and it can also produce secretions. Epithelium is reliant on diffusion from capillaries for food and oxygen. Next, we look at the connective tissue. And again, just thinking of the word connect, because it supports and connects different structures of the body. It usually has its own blood supply, and types of connective tissue include bone, cartilage, adipose, and blood vessels. Not surprisingly, with muscle tissue, it produces movement. You do need to know that the three types of muscle tissue are skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And then finally, nervous tissue, we think of that as connecting to the central nervous system, provides the structure for the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. All right, next, we'll go into a few of the systems that we need to know. So in other sections and other videos, we'll go into these in a lot more detail, but just understanding the basics. The immune system protects the body from foreign pathogens, while the endocrine system produces and secretes hormones to control bodily processes like sleep cycles. I believe that was one of our questions on sleep cycles. Yeah, the fourth question down there: which system controls sleep cycles? Endocrine. All right. The circulatory system moves blood throughout the body to enable nutrient delivery and waste removal from tissues. Okay, there's the circulatory system. And all these have like their own videos and their own sections in the exam. The respiratory system takes in oxygen and releases carbon dioxide either through the nose, throat, or lungs. And then finally, skeletal system is made up of bones and protects internal organs, creates blood cells, and provides a framework for muscles. Okay, so you have two things left here, the planes, and then we're also going to have to look at direction. Okay, so you got your three planes here. The coronal plane separates the body into front and back halves. The sagittal plane, which was a question back at the beginning, we'll see it again here at the end, separates the body into left and right halves. And then the transverse plane, it runs horizontal and divides the body into top and bottom. Sometimes the transverse plane is also referred to as the axial plane, but on the exam you're going to hear it referred to as the transverse plane. Okay, and then directional. Okay, so we got, I think, 8 of these. Do you have to know all of them? Yes, unfortunately you do. All right, and so this is a combination of the planes, right? So as you kind of just go through these really quick, superior is the top half of the body along the transverse plane, while inferior is the exact opposite, the bottom half of the body along the transverse plane. As you're looking at anterior and ventral, that will be the bottom half of the body along the transverse plane. Whoop. Sorry, I read the wrong one there. The anterior ventral is the front part of the body along the coronal plane. Posterior dorsal will be the back part of the body along the coronal plane. Medial toward the midline along the sagittal, while lateral is going to be away from the midline along the sagittal plane. And finally, our last two, proximal will be towards the post of origin, distal away from the post of origin. And I would definitely expect at least one question along this directional. Okay, and then we get back to our questions again. So we've kind of gone through them all. So I'm hoping that you will go ahead and answer these questions, right? And if any of them are a struggle and you have to go back to parts of the video, that's a good sign, right? That's how learning happens, right? Is as opposed to just listening to the video and then moving on, taking the time to answer these questions, make sure you got them down. Will help you a lot as you're getting prepared for the exam.